This video is for the interior design class at Salt Lake Community College, the 1100 class, and today we're going to be covering reflected ceiling plans. So hopefully you've had a chance to read in the book about reflected ceiling plans and have a little bit of an understanding, and I just kind of wanted to talk you through a few of those requirements and kind of show you a demonstration on how to draw reflected ceiling plans. So I've got my pencils, I've got my architectural ruler, my straight edge and a triangle to be able to work on this assignment today. And the first thing that you need is to draw your floor plan. So a reflected ceiling plan, basically what you do is you just draw your floor plan like you normally would, but you're going to imagine that you've kind of got a mirror and now you're looking up at your ceiling. So the floor plan's drawn the same way, but we're kind of looking at a reflection of what the ceiling plan is, and so we just kind of draw that straight over this. So in order to draw the floor plan, you go ahead and draw your walls and poche them like you normally would. For windows along the exterior, you're going to draw those the same with kind of a thinner line weight with your a line in the middle to show that that's a window, and you can see a couple windows up here on that edge. Your doors, however, are a little bit different in that you're going to show two lines here which represent the header of the door, and you don't draw your door swing. So you're just going to show just a very simplified couple of lines here for the header at the door, and this will allow us someplace to kind of draw our ceiling graphics so that they have a place to stop, right? So so once you've got your floor plan drawn, you don't draw any furniture, you don't draw cabinets, you don't draw anything like that. Ceilings usually just run above all of those things, so you don't need to show any of that stuff. If something is touching the ceiling or breaks up the ceiling in some way, you would want to show that. But typically, it's pretty minimal as far as those things that you would show there. Now, the next thing you need to know is the type of a ceiling that you're going to be wanting to draw in each one of your rooms. And there are three basic ceiling types. The first one are called ceiling panels. Oftentimes they're referred to as ceiling tiles, but technically ceiling tiles and ceiling panels are a little bit different. But what you see in a classroom, say at a high school or a college classroom or laboratory, those are typically ceiling panels. And they're usually 2 feet wide by 4 feet long. So 2 feet by 4 feet would be a typical ceiling panel size. The next, probably most common ceiling type is a gypsum board ceiling. And you see these mostly in residential applications. Almost all ceilings are gypsum board. And then you might add some details like some faux beams or beams and things like that, or you might do some wood paneling that's on top of it to give it a certain look. But gypsum board is the typical one there. In commercial construction, you'll see gypsum board usually in high-end laboratories or in restrooms. And then the last common ceiling type is just an open ceiling, where you don't put any ceiling in at all, and you can see the structure above, the joists and any beams and things like that might be above the ceiling. But you kind of do that if you just want to leave it open or have a wide open space. Oftentimes you'll see this in a lot of retail areas, commercial retail spaces, and you just kind of leave them open. So I'm going to show you on my floor plan here that I've drawn those three different ceiling types and how to draw them in your plans. So I've got three rooms here. This one's about the size of a bathroom. This one is maybe a small office, and this is maybe an open classroom here that I'm kind of drawing and going to show to you. So in this one, my office, what I want to do is a ceiling panel, and I want to do a 2 foot by 4 foot ceiling panel. So when you're doing ceiling panels, you're going to draw your panels first, and there's some other elements that we're going to need to add on top of that. So you're going to want to figure out how to lay out that ceiling panel. So lay out the ceiling panels in the room. So you'll notice here that this room is 8 feet wide by 12 feet long, right? And so I'm going to come in here and I want to lay that out. So I could do 2 4-foot panels that go this way and just have one row run along there and one row run along there. But I've got to start thinking about where my light's going to go. How's that going to lay out, and how am I going to do my HVAC equipment and diffusers. So I could run them going the other way and maybe have them, be the long way running this way, but I kind of have that same problem, and now I'm trying to put two of them side by side. So you kind of want to think through how those are going to lay out. With experience, you'll kind of figure that out. You might want to try a couple of different layouts before you kind of move forward. But what I've decided here is I'm going to have my 4-foot panel run this way, and then I'll have a little 2-foot panel on each end, and then my 2-foot grid will run the long way this way. Okay, so now that I've kind of decided that, and you'll see why in just a minute why I decided that sort of a layout, but now I can come in here and I'm just going to draw in my grid layout for my ceiling panel. Okay. So there's 4 feet, and then I've got 2 feet left over on each end there. And now I've come in and I've marked these up just to make it easier on myself and a little quicker, but you would measure each one of those off, and then you come down here and you're going to draw 2 feet. And you notice how I'm creating this sort of a grid pattern in here. So it's a 2 foot by 2 foot by 4 foot ceiling grid pattern, right? And so what I've got here's my 2 foot by 4 foot panels, and then I've got infill on each end, just a 2 foot by 2 foot panel on each of the ends. So the reason why I do that is because now I can come in here and I can lay out my lighting panels fairly easily. So you want fairly even distribution of lighting in your room, and I know we're not covering that really in depth in this class, but you just kind of want to think about where those are going to go. So if I put a 2 foot by 4 foot light here in that area and another one here, that should give me pretty good coverage for this room. So the way that I draw that is I'm going to draw a little border in here, and there's several different types of lighting fixtures that you can show in a 2 by 4, but I'm just going to kind of show you a very common way to show that. So I'm just coming along here and drawing basically kind of a 2-inch border, not worrying about it being exactly, so I'm not measuring it off, but I'm just going to show that there like that. Right. So there's my ceiling fixtures, and then since those are fixtures, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to darken just a little bit, create this a little bit darker, heavier line that goes around those ceiling fixtures for my lights. So now you can see, as soon as I pull this back here, you can see that helps it just kind of stand out a little bit with that little darker outline, a little bit thicker and darker outline that goes around each one of those. Now those lights sort of stand out. So that's one of the first things that we need to put in there is our lighting. The second is your HVAC, and HVAC stands for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. So it's basically the temperature control for the room, heating in the winter, cooling in the summer, and we need a way to supply that air to the room, and then you also need a way to take away that air. You can't just pressurize a room and not have that air escape. And so typically you'll have both a supply air and a return air. So typically you're going to put a supply air away from the door, right? You do get some leakage through the door. This is why we kind of do this. So I'm going to put a supply air kind of just further away in a corner, and then I'll put my return air over here near the door so that we're circulating air through the room this way and then pulling it out there. So a supply air panel or fixture, diffuser, that's the word I was looking for, is shown by an X. So I just take this panel here and I draw an X through that. Okay, and then again sort of darken that up so that looks more like a panel, and you can create a little border again on this one too if you want to make it look it's like a little panel there. You see these when you go into classrooms, they're pretty common, 2 foot by 2 foot panel that you'll see up in the ceiling, and that's a supply air. So the air comes in here, and then I'm going to come over here and I will show over here a return air. Okay, so again, I'm just going to kind of create this little interior frame on the inside here. Oops. And then darken that up, so again it's a nice dark and it kind of stands out. So the return air is just a single line. Okay. So now I've got my supply air and my return air in this room. Okay. And then one of the last things that you'll usually show in a room is an exit. Now, technically, in an office, you don't need to show an exit. Well, actually, let's not show it here. We'll get to that in a minute. But in an office, you don't need to show an exit sign because there's only one exit out of the room. So if you're in the room, you know where to go in order to be able to exit out of that room. Okay. So let's move on to my corridor here. And I'm going to do the same thing. However, this time I know that I want my lighting to kind of march down the corridor and kind of right down the center. I don't want it shifted to one side or the other. That doesn't give very good lighting. So, but if I just have my lights go right down the center, it'll give a nice diffuse light. So I'm going to run this grid work pattern, this 2x4 pattern, lengthwise that way. So I've already, again, drawn this out. I've just done little tick marks. So it's a 4-foot wide corridor. You can see there it's 4 feet wide, and I'm going to go through and I'll now lay out my grid work for my hall. Okay, and then again you come along here and you mark it 4 feet this way, because now I've got, that's 2 feet wide. I'm going to have a little 1 foot wide panel on each side, but that's in order to give me that lighting right down the center of my hall here that I want. So now I just come along here, and where I've marked off my 4 feet, I just draw this. Now you can start to see why we drew those headers across the door, so that we can tell where these doors are, because we stop our ceilings at each one of those marks, and it helps just kind of see those kind of stand out, each one of our door locations. All right, so there's now our ceiling grid running down that corridor. All right, and now I'm going to go through and I would add in my lights. So here I'm probably going to do one at about every 4 panels. Again, if you were doing this in a commercial setting, you would have a lighting engineer that you would work with, and they would give you this layout, and you would draw that in a reflected ceiling plan. So the other thing to kind of note about this is the reason that we draw a reflected ceiling plan is so that we can coordinate. Well, I didn't quite draw that enough space there, but so that we can coordinate different elements. As designers, interior designers, and architects, we're the ones who coordinate between the mechanical engineer and the electrical engineer for the lighting, and each one of those disciplines, so that they have a space to go and they're not interfering with each other. So we get these, put them all together, and then we'll coordinate with them to say, hey, you need to move your supply air diffuser, or hey, electrical, can you move this light by a little bit or shift it over one grid? And we kind of coordinate with them to make it all work out. And of course, during that whole time, we're kind of adding our own ideas and thoughts about how that layout should look, and just from a design standpoint, and to kind of fit in with the whole design of the rest of the building. Okay. So there we go, down my corridor there, right? And then down the corridor, typically you'll have one return air, 1 or 2 down a pretty long corridor. So I'm not going to show a return air here, but I will show a supply air, and I'm going to show that one just right here. So I take that, they're 2 by 2, like we showed in the other room. So I can just break up this 4 by 4 panel, and I will make this a 2 foot by 2 area, and then draw in my little frame here for it. Darken around the outside again so that it stands out just a little bit. Okay, and then draw my X. Okay. So there's my supply air and a couple of lights running down the corridor, so I'm starting to show that. Okay, now, so that's a couple of examples of ceiling panel types. The next thing that I want to show is an open ceiling type. So in this one, we don't have a panel, a grid system to lay things into. So I'm just going to lay out my lighting pattern, how I want to have it, and then I'll show my diffusers, and then I will, then I'll show how you kind of replicate or graphically illustrate the structure that's above. So in this room right here, what I want to do is I'm gonna do 4 lights, 1, 2, 3, 4, just in here. It's a pretty large room, and I'm just gonna have them be the 2-foot by 4-foot style lighting. In fact, actually, let's do it a little bit different because you can do lighting different. Let's do 6 lights in here, but let's make them smaller lights, just 2-foot by 2-foot lights. So in this one, my room is 10 feet wide by 18 feet long, right? So I'm just going to come, let's do it this way. Let's come 3 feet off of here, and then I'll do a 2-foot light, and then I'll come 3 feet off of here and do a 2-foot light, and then between there and there I have about 7 feet. So if I go to the middle of that, which is 1, 2, 3.5 feet, and then come 1 foot back that way and go 1 foot that way. All right, there's oops, I made that a little too big. All right, there's my 2-foot light there. Okay, so then let's say that I just want to have that be off of here, maybe come off 1.5 feet this way, and then go 2 feet, and then from this wall come 1.5 feet, and then go 2 feet. All right, so I just kind of measure that off, and now I'm just going to very lightly kind of draw these in until I've got them exactly where I want them to be. Let's just draw this really lightly. So this is that construction line that I was telling you to kind of use when you lay things out. Very light, thin line that's going to disappear. It's kind of like those guidelines for your text. All right, but I can barely see them there. But I just use this to kind of lay it out. Okay, so there's my 6 lights that you can see. Now that I know where they're at, I can go back in and just darken them up and draw them in. So I'm going to do that really quickly, but not make this too long. So see if I can get this taken care of very quickly for you. Okay, I think just to make this kind of easier, I'm just going to draw these as dark, and you'll realize that this is kind of what the lights are. Okay, now the next thing that I need to do is I need to add in a couple of supply air diffusers and a couple of return air diffusers. So what I'm going to do here is just let's add a supply over here and maybe a return over here in the opposite corner, and just so that it looks good, I'm just gonna line it up with these. So I've already got those marked off, and I'm gonna put a little 2x2 over here in this corner. So you'll notice with this, I'm not kind of restricted necessarily to that grid that you are when you do a panel. There's a little bit more flexibility and freedom in how you lay this out. But things also look good when they're kind of lined up to each other. We're used to seeing that. And so oftentimes that's just kind of the way that you end up doing it anyway. And things are kind of lined up and you can see each other. So There's the supply air diffuser. I'm going to put that right there. And then come over here, and we'll just do a return air over here. Mark that off. Okay, so there's my lights and my supply air and my return air. Okay, now what I want to do is, again, we don't need to show exit signage here, but we can kind of move. Again, you've got 2 exits. People usually know if they can pick 2. It's usually just when you have to have a decision, or if there's a long way to the exit where you need to show an exit sign, which I'll show in just a second. And then so now what I want to do is show the structure above. So structure is usually joists, is what we typically see in each room, and they're often spaced at about 2 feet on center, sometimes a little bit further, sometimes a little bit closer, but for what we're kind of doing in this class, and even when I just am doing something quickly as a concept, I'll just space it at 2 feet until we figure out exactly what it is. So I've gone along here and I've marked 2 feet. And now I'm just going to show each one of those joists that are kind of up and above and how they run through this room. Right? And so it's just going to be a quick kind of a double line, and it runs through the entire room, but it's going to break at each one of these things. So the diffusers and the lights are below the structure, so you see the structure up above it, but you don't see the structure where the lights are. All right? Does that make sense? I hope. So you just kind of break this as you draw that along. Now this one here, it doesn't hit any of the lights, so it just comes all the way through. Right, and the next joist here. Okay, and that one doesn't hit any. This one right here just barely runs past there. I'll show that right there. And this one here just hits those. And don't forget to stop these lines at your door headers, at your windows, whatever they are. Right. So that's the way you would show an open ceiling. So I've got my light, my 6 lights in there. I've got my diffuser and my my 2 diffusers in there. Okay. Let's come back to the hallway. So you're in the hallway and you may not know which way to go to exit. Right. So the way that you'll show an exit sign, and on yours, so you're doing the reflected ceiling plan for your final in the commercial space. So basically any doors that you can exit out of the facility, you want to put a little exit sign over the top. So the way you do that is you just draw a little circle. Right? So let's say that my exit is down this way. So I just draw a circle, and then through that circle you just draw a little X. And this is the typical sign for an exit sign, or graphic for an exit sign. Okay. Right, so that's all you have to do there. Okay, so then the last one is, say, this little restroom that I have right here, and it's going to be a gypsum board ceiling. But I'm going to follow the same process as kind of what I did for the open. I'm going to show the light, and then I'm going to show a supply air, and then we're going to show a fan, right? An exhaust fan, because we're not going to take that air and take it back to the air handler and then spread it throughout the entire building. We're going to take the air from the bathroom and we're going to exhaust it out through the roof or to the exterior, right? So you need to kind of know a little bit about what your layout is below, even though I haven't drawn it. So I probably have a sink here and my toilet down here, right? So above the sink is where I'm going to have my light, right? And so even though that light, so I'm going to put just a light right here, that's above my sink, right? And this one's going to be just a little 6-inch wide. It's going to be a little narrow light that's 6 inches, and then I'm going to have it be 4 feet long. Well, actually, I'm going to do it 3 feet. That looks more correct. All right. So there's my ceiling light right above the sink, where that light would be, and that's usually enough light to illuminate the entire room. So again, just a little. Oh, wait, I don't want to show that as an X. But that's my little light there. Okay, so then the next thing is, let's show just a small fan. And a ceiling fan is usually like 12 by 12. I call it a ceiling fan. It's an exhaust fan. So I would just put that right here above where my toilet is. All right. So this is the one that's maybe a little different, where you're going to exhaust. You always put your exhaust right above your toilet for obvious reasons. Okay. So an exhaust fan is shown a little bit differently. It's one diagonal, and then the other direction just goes halfway. So it's like that. Okay, and so that shows the contractor that is an exhaust fan, not HVAC return air. Okay. And then maybe over here by the door is where I would place my supply air, because we still need to keep this room a little bit, temperature controlled. We want that hot air and that cold air when we need it. So I just do a quick supply air grill or diffuser. Sorry, those terms are kind of used interchangeably. All right, so there's what I have. I've got my light, I've got my supply air and my exhaust fan, and then gypsum board is typically shown just with a bunch of dots. Sorry if that's shaking the camera quite a bit. So you don't put the dots over where your the lights and the diffusers are, but just a bunch of dots in here, and that just kind of shows that that's a gypsum board ceiling. That's the graphic that we use there. Okay, so then the last thing that you're going to want to do when you're doing your final, and that we put on these, is you're going to have a legend for these things. And I'm not going to draw everything that we just drew, but up here you can either draw it full scale, or you can draw kind of a scaled down version of it. But let me come up here and kind of already started my legend. One of the things that I've noticed that some of you are doing with your legend is they're a little bit disjointed. Try to line things up, where text starts, and so that things have kind of a nice sequence to them, and they kind of look right, rather than kind of having them be jumbled all over the place. Really work to just kind of line these things up. All right, so I might just do a little graphic version here of my light fixture. All right, my 2x4 light fixture, and then over here I'm going to draw my couple of guidelines for my text, and then I will label that. I'll switch over to my 2B, and I will call this a 2-foot by 4-foot light fixture. Okay, so you do that for each one of your lights, and then maybe you want to call out the diffuser. So I maybe draw out a little graphic of what the diffuser looks like. draw some couple quick guidelines here for my lettering, and then I'd call this out as a H E C supply. Air diffuser. Okay, and you could go down and I could add the exit sign and the others, just however, you know, you'd add each one of those and kind of create your legend as you go along. All right, so there is your example on how to draw a reflected ceiling plan. And again, I kind of focused on commercial type construction, and hopefully that will help you get through your assignment for your final and getting your reflected ceiling plan laid out. As always, if you have any questions, go ahead and send me a message through Canvas, just send me an email or give me a phone call. Thanks, bye.